Part of our agenda this week is honoring commissioners from the Royal Commission and from the TRC, and there is
Unfortunately, I will not be able to attend this conference on sharing the land.
And here he is.
Unfortunately, I will not be able to attend this conference on sharing the land, sharing the future, which is a celebration 20 years later of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. My situation just does not allow me to attend this wonderful conference. I want to send greetings to everybody that's going to be there, and I wish you a wonderful conference. Feel, you know, a bit of regret that I will not be able to see commissioners, former commissioners, and former staff that worked with me during the RCAP process. I must say it was a wonderful experience in my life. It was very intense, hard work. I remember, you know, 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning going through copies of the next chapters that we're going to deal with in our meetings and stuff like that, and combing through every last little word. And you know, it was very intense, but what wonderful work, what a wonderful team we had as commissioners, and the staff to me were absolutely wonderful. So I want to send thanks to all the commissioners and staff that are there, and I want to also recognize the work that was done by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I've looked at your report and followed your work, obviously, and attended a few of the events. I want to thank you for the work that you've done, and obviously it's going to carry on. The reconciliation work that needs to be done is extremely important. In relation to the impact of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, you know, 20 years later, question is, you know, is it still relevant? You know, should it just be forgotten? Should it be like another report, you know, gathering dust? I find that it is still amazingly current, fundamentally important. One of my recent jobs was for 12 years being the chief negotiator of the debt show here in the Northwest Territories. And it's amazing how often, just that even at that table, that the work that the Royal Commission did could play a role there. And for instance, one of the impacts we had recently, 2 years ago, was that the alternatives to extinguishment that we had recommended for the comprehensive claims process all of a sudden was fully implemented. We had had a partial implementation, which the Clean Show up here had used in their agreement, so that you know, they had fought to find a way to have an agreement that did not extinguish their rights, and so they have this policy implementation on extinguishment that had, unfortunately, a release at the end. If an issue was taken to court on land and it had been successful, then that particular right was actually extinguished. So a couple of years ago, the Stephen Harper government said, you know, we were doing a review on comprehensive claims, any suggestions for changes, and you know, that was one of the areas we participated in, that get rid of the back-end release. Just have a complete, unadulterated recognition clause that had been recommended by the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. Lo and behold, the government actually recognized it, and we put it into the debt show agreement. So it continues to be a living document. There are many examples of how it, you know, it impacts on everyday life. With the government now saying, you know, they're prepared to do something, I think if Canadians and Aboriginal people participate in that, what I've learned by being in politics most of my life is that politicians only move when they have no option. I have not seen very often, genuine leadership from the hearts and from the ethics of politicians. Usually, their goal is to get reelected, and Aboriginal policies, Indigenous policies, have never really been an election issue, even though Canadians have always supported Canadian governments to do more and to do the right thing. It's never been an election issue. You're not going to lose an election usually because you haven't implemented an Aboriginal issue. And so my experience has been you need to force and strong-arm governments. You have to cajole if that's going to work. You have to sweet-talk them if that's necessary, but if not, then you need to take to the streets and you need to get Canadian support. The more support you can get, the better it is. We had to do that way back when in the 70s when we wanted a comprehensive claims policy that had both land and governance. After many years of effort, we ended up with a policy that had both governance and land. And so I think that the document's still relevant. The major recommendations for land governance, dealing with social issues, dealing with young people now, so that we have Aboriginal people that are participating fully in the Canadian society, all relevant, and it can still be implemented. It's still as relevant today as when we printed it 20 years ago. So I wish you a wonderful conference, and I look forward to the results of this conference. Thank you. Masicho, good luck.
George continues to be in the minds and the hearts of those of us who worked closely with him over 5 years and have carried the messages that were formulated, voiced, truly, as the minister has said, coming out of the voices of the people that gave the power to the analysis, the research, and the recommendations, that it was not experts explaining or describing a path forward, but it was, I believe, the first major document that synthesized, that brought together the voices of Indigenous people and their dreams and their capacities with the analysis of scholars, including Indigenous scholars, and brought that synthesis to the recommendations.